Today's episode is brought to you by the book Conversations: How to Manage Your Business Relationships One Conversation at a Time. It's available on Amazon, Audible, and Kindle. Visit conversations.biz/book for more information. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Conversations About Conversations. On this show, we explore what it takes to lead conversations that make a difference. My guest today is my friend and colleague, Kumar Phillips. Kumar, welcome to Conversations About Conversations.
Ivan, thank you so much for having me. As a longtime listener, it's a real privilege to be here on the show finally after about 3 years, where I remember Conversations episode number 1 with you and Pete recording at lunch. So it's really wonderful to be finally joining you on this podcast.
I'm so glad you're here. You finally said yes to my invitations. Longtime listener, first time guest. To get started, I thought we would just talk a little bit about our approach to conversations. Would you like to begin?
Absolutely. For me, when it comes to conversations and thinking about conversations as a relationship manager, most important thing for me is preparation. In the same way that professional athletes always practice and practice and practice before the main event so they can perform at their peak, I think you have to prepare for any conversation you're going to have with a client. For me, it's thinking about previous conversations I've had with that client, things that they brought up versus things that I brought up, thinking about things that I know I need to cover with them, whether it's something related to the relationship or what we're doing for them. What I think is the most important, and I say it third only because it's not necessarily required, but trying to think outside the box of what the client might want to actually talk about today on our conversation. And then finally, is there anything that maybe isn't required that maybe I don't think the client's going to want to talk about, but anything I might think makes sense to bring up and talk with them about. And from there, I think it really sets a good framework for me to be able to come in and have a very successful conversation with that client.
How much more do you prepare now than when you started as a relationship manager?
I would say a lot more. As I've evolved in my career, my conversations have become much more complex and nuanced. And so I found that probably 3 or 4 years ago was when that shift happened. And so I really started for, every conversation I was having, I would probably spend 20 or 30 minutes just thinking, okay, going into this conversation, what's the format? What do we need to cover? What's important here? And how do I get the most out of this call? Or how do I really add as much value as I can on this conversation?
How do you do that? How do you add value in a conversation?
I think what it comes down to is really knowing my clients' needs better than anyone else possibly can. Figuring out what makes them tick, what they're hoping to get out of this relationship, and how best I can serve those needs, knowing that I really can't do everything. There are just some things that are outside of my control, and being consistently aware of that, I think is the best way to come in from a preparation standpoint. In addition to knowing their needs, is you have to make your clients comfortable and you have to make them like you. If they don't like you, those conversations aren't going to go anywhere. And so I hate to steal another guest's thunder here, but the Good Doctor, who's one of my favorites when he's on your podcast, when he talks about treating clients like family, it really resonates, because one of my earliest mentors once told me that every client you ever work with is someone to somebody else, meaning it's their parent, grandparent, child, grandchild, brother, sister, aunt, uncle. And so the most effective way I've found to handle these conversations and to build rapport and trust is to think about my dad. He's my best friend, my hero, my idol, closer with him than I've ever been with anyone. And so I always come into every conversation with a client or a new client relationship thinking, if I was the relationship manager for my dad, how would I want him to be treated by that person? When I take that mindset, it makes everything else easy. This first mentor I had told me, here's 2 tips. Be genuine and authentic with your clients and focus on their needs. When you understand why I'm telling you only worry about these 2 things, then you're ready to focus on the other stuff. And so it's been a gradual process of trying to get better and better at uncovering those needs and really seeing what I can uncover that even I had no idea was going on in their lives.
This is not something that most people are good at. They focus on topics instead of needs. They focus on the company and what they're supposed to do for the company instead of, what if this client was my dad? How would I approach them as if they're family. So I think you're off to a good start there. What's a strategy that you use to get people to like you?
I think the big one is just find common ground. A lot of times, relationship managers spend time debating out the things that they might philosophically disagree with their client on. I think finding the common ground of the things you do agree on, and there are plenty of them, where somebody in Portland, Oregon can find common ground with somebody in Johnson City, Tennessee. They just have to look for it. Being sincerely interested in them, asking questions, being curious about, who are they? What are they interested in? What do they do when they're not talking about their retirement with you? I think all of these things are a good way to show them, that you are being genuine and authentic, and you really genuinely do care about them and helping them.
I have something I want to share with you because I'm pretty excited about it. I worked on my book this morning. I work on my book in the mornings. I worked on it for about 2.5 hours, and I've kind of felt blocked all week. I decided, based on reading a book called The $1 Million Book Formula, that you start with a problem. And I was having trouble being really clear what the problem was until this morning. I started off by writing a letter to 25-year-old Ivan. 25-year-old Ivan was a hard worker, was not balanced, was all about, it wasn't about emotional intelligence. It was about how much I could impress people. It wasn't about expressing myself. It was about impressing people. I start off and I write, "Dear Ivan, I can't believe how naive and unsophisticated and unaware you are. And it's only because I now have 25 years more experience that I can explain that how little I knew." Now, I'm not sure this is going to be the title of the book. It's funny. This got inspired. I was just flipping through titles, and there's this book called Girl, Wash Your Face. And I don't really know about what the book's about, but I wanted a title or a concept that's going to like punch a young man in the face, because the book's going to be for young men in their mid-20s. And I thought, what about you need to be more consciously incompetent, or something like how to become consciously incompetent. Now you would say, why would you want to be incompetent? And because the problem that I believe the book's going to solve is that people are unconsciously incompetent. And so, of course, admitting that you have a problem is the first step. And that's what I'm excited about in terms of the writing I did earlier today.
Yeah, I'm excited for that as well. And I think it's something that a lot of folks in the relationship management world, or even in business in general, need to learn or need to hear firsthand in terms of, I don't want to say regret, but in terms of a better way to do things.
When I started this Dear Ivan letter, then it led to all the things that I now know. And then I said, Ivan, 25-year-old Ivan, you didn't know this, you didn't know that. It also really helps me be really harsh with people, because I'm telling 25-year-old Ivan this stuff and really being very critical. Obviously, the book is written for other people, 25, let's say 25 to 35-year-old men, to really see themselves in it. But I just love the freedom. It's like, I'm not talking to you, reader, I'm talking to Ivan. But yes, it's able to be relatable, I think. Well, we'll find out.
I'm curious what you learned most while writing this Dear Ivan letter.
What I learned most was that I had a lot of problems. I still have some of those problems. People have a lot of these problems, and they just are unconsciously incompetent about it, like in denial. These are not just problems that I had. Obviously, I do a lot of coaching and mentoring of others. And so I could definitely see these are not unique to 25-year-old me. The other thing I most learned, even though that's doubling up, is that I have a lot of passion about telling people what their problems are. And I'm excited because I can now write 25 essays. You, and I don't mean you, just Kumar, but you have some of these problems. Now I'm going to write you 25 essays of making you fully aware of the problem, and then give some ideas of how to overcome the problem. Because now I have 25 years of experience, and there's more, of course, to learn, but 25 years that I can say, here you go, Kumar.
I think that's great. If I can ask another question, if you were to be let's say working with somebody who's 24 or 25 now, in that range that you were in. And as they're listening to this podcast, they say, hey, I have some of these issues too. What advice do you have for them?
Well, I mean, it depends on the issue, but I'm going to give you a little sneak peek. I just pulled up on my teleprompter some of these problems. It'll be really specific. Problem number one, you wing it too much of the time. Now you've already identified, Kumar, that you prepare, I think you said a few minutes ago, you prepare 20 to 30 minutes for a conversation. And I've done an episode about this. I once prepared 10 hours for what could have been a 10-minute conversation. And I'm not even exaggerating. Like, I thought about my values. I went and practiced the conversation with another relationship manager. I then wrote out a dialogue. I literally spent 10 hours, and obviously people overuse the word literally, but I literally did, not figuratively. But what I wrote in the book, problem number one, you wing it too much of the time. You're too casual in your preparations for your conversations. Your conversations underwhelm your clients because they know you haven't fully prepared. And as a result, because you haven't prepared, you're unable to add sufficient value.
On that point, I do think it's important to point out that the level of preparation is definitely going to be different for everyone, where you or I might over prepare relative to somebody else. And certainly there are some people who can wing it just naturally and get away with it. And that's just the way the world works. Everybody's good at different things. But for me personally, I'm more of a natural introvert. Until you get to know me, then you can't get me to stop talking. But for me to feel confident in my job as a relationship manager, I really feel like I have to prepare and know everything, so that depending on what comes up, I can try to use that information in a way that's tailored to the conversation, where I want to have the depth, but not necessarily have to use all of it.
Here's another problem I identified, is that I talk too much. I try to impress people too much. I tried to brag, and I really dominated people. Like, I would dominate the conversation. I wouldn't listen. I would interrupt like crazy, either because I thought I had something good to say and I didn't want to forget to say it, or because that's how I felt I added value. I'm absolutely clear now. One of the best ways to add value is to listen.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point that you made on that. And something I've learned, I don't know if you spend much time looking at Daniel Kahneman's work about type 1 and type 2 thinking, where your type 1 thinking is just very natural and impulse based and tends not to be very introspective or valuable at all. And then the type 2 thinking is a little more measured, where you're sitting there thinking about it. You may have, an awkward pause or two, which is good in a conversation where you actually have to think about it. And as I've read and studied more and more of that, I've found that it's become more helpful in the conversations, because not only does it allow the quality of what you're saying to come out a little more clearly and concisely, and you get rid of things that are just impulse reactions that are unnecessary, but at the same time, I think a lot of those pauses go back to the point of getting a client to like and trust you. It's genuine. If you have to think before you can fully answer a question, you're being very genuine and authentic. You're showing them that, hey, I don't really know. I need to think about this before I give you an answer, rather than just rattling off whatever comes off the top of your head.
But I'll often give the advice to think about using punctuation in what you're saying. Having complete sentences, period. Maybe talking in paragraphs, but thinking that way. And that requires maturity and extensive self-control that I didn't have when I was 25. And that to me really is a difference. Like, if you are, let's say, one of the largest clients, you have tens of millions of dollars, and you're working with somebody who rushes, who's not letting you finish your sentences, who's not listening to you, that's going to be maybe in one of the essays, is to own the pause.
Yeah, that's actually something that I picked up from reading your book. was the self-discipline of doing the right things on the phone and how, not just on the phone in person and traveling to meet with folks. How you carry yourself is everything. It's one of those where, although you never think about it until after the fact, one negative impression can outweigh many, many positive impressions. And so you always want any impression you're leaving with a client, if you're their relationship manager, to your point, to be a positive one. And I think your presence and self-control and how you present yourself is important. I have it inside my drawer on my desk. It's a Maya Angelou quote that always reminds me of this when I'm having a tough conversation or conversation's not going the way I would hope, of saying, okay, bite your tongue. Remember that positive impressions are what you want. A negative one's going to take 10 positive ones to overcome. It's, people may never remember what you say. People may never remember what you did, but people will always remember the way that you made them feel. And so for me, just looking at that and thinking about that regularly, if I get into a tough conversation, it's like my easy button where, I hit the mute button on my headset and I just sit there and, try to think about how do I want to articulate something rather than just blurting something out.
That's a great quote. And as you first mentioned Maya Angelou, I was wondering if you were going to go all the way and say that quote, but it is so true. People don't remember what you say. In fact, you don't remember what you say a lot of the time, but they do remember how you made them feel, and what they're left with is how you made them feel. I also thought when you were talking about the books in your top drawer that you might mention that the book Conversations, How to Manage Your Business Relationships One Conversation at a Time, was also in the top drawer.
It's actually on my bookshelf at home. So when I'm doing my preparation, outside of the office or thinking about ways to improve, that's one of the tools I use. Actually, I've got it sitting right here next to me. I pulled it out and I hadn't really fully looked through it in a little while. Now that I'm looking at it, it's interesting to see the things I initially highlighted when I read through it and the things that stood out to me. It's interesting reading the autographed inscription from Mr. Ivan Farber from 2018 and in the advice you had for me. And so it's always neat to look back on these things. And it's why I always keep every hard copy book instead of lending them out or giving them away, because I think part of growth is coming back a year or 2 or 3 years down the line and checking out what's changed, what resonated to you 3 years ago, and is there something different that stands out to you now based off of where you're at in your evolutionary process.
What else is there for you inside of this conversation, or just in our relationship, or what have you?
Well, what I was thinking might be a good idea and might be helpful for some folks that listen to the podcast is just to see some of the things that you alluded to that I did highlight when I first read through the book. Not all of them, because most of the book is highlighted, but there are definitely a few that as I was going through and rereading these, because it had been probably 6 months since I went through the book, there were definitely some things that stood out that 2018 Kumar highlighted and felt very helpful, that I think will be helpful to a lot of other folks. So one, and this is page 1 in the preface, where it says, success in your career depends on your ability to gain agreement for action. I think it's something that until I read that in the book, I had never actually thought about it that way. It's something that it's so obvious now. We say, okay, yeah, you're looking for agreement to action, but you never think about that as a new relationship manager. It's, you have something you want to share with the client, you call them, you share with them, you ask them if they have questions, and then you move on. But until seeing that, I never really thought about that as a sort of an evolutionary process. Every conversation is a step, along a staircase. And that staircase is the relationship. And then the other one that I think is also early on, and I'm sure this is probably exactly why you put these in this order, under lesson 1, building rapport. And this is something that a lot of people, to the point of, avoiding pain or avoiding the unpleasant, avoid as relationship managers, and it hurts them because it's a problem that if you don't address it up front will compound and compound and compound. But it says being successful in life, in business, and in your relationships requires you to become comfortable in the face of awkward or difficult conversations. And so for me, that was at a point in my career where I knew how to do the job. I knew the information that I needed to share with folks, but I was still very much a people pleaser as a relationship manager. I told clients what I had thought they wanted to hear rather than the harsh reality of sometimes what they needed to hear. Doesn't mean that you have to be abrasive and tell them they're wrong or get into an argument, but that was sort of the point in my career where I started thinking about how do I actually play this out in a conversation where I can push back on something that I need to, or without causing a confrontation, how can I skillfully set this up to where the client understands that I'm pushing back on something and saying, hey, you need to hear this, that's not correct, without leaving a bad impression in their mind. It's something nobody's ever going to be great at, but I think we all have opportunity to improve there. I feel like year after year, I continue to get better at this. There are times that I thought I was skillful in bringing this up in conversations with clients or in my personal life, where I look back on it and I just wasn't. 2018 Kumar was terrible at this. 2019 Kumar was a little bit better. 2020 Kumar a little bit better. 2021 Kumar a little better, but I'm still probably a 3 out of 10, even though I've continued to get better after year after year.
As you were saying that, I was thinking of like cars, that you have like the 2021 version of the car, the model. And that's all we all are, is a work in progress. Mm-hmm. One of the biggest surprises to me in writing the book was that success in your career, in your relationships, actually, and I'm so glad you mentioned that, success in your career depends upon your ability to gain agreement for action. That didn't occur to me until I wrote the book and I got to the last chapter, which is resolve and gain agreement for action. And at one point in time, it was win agreement, because that's like a winner and a loser in a conversation. But then, yes, full circle back, it is agreement, in the second half of the book being the structure of a conversation, agreement about what the conversation is for. And when you don't have agreement what's for, then rapport goes out immediately. You mentioned awkward and difficult. You don't have agreement and it kills rapport. One of my mentees and I always said, how do you know if you have rapport? And it would just be this circle, because it's not awkward and not difficult. And how do you know if you have agreement? It's because it's not awkward and difficult. You have agreement about where you're going. And so that first step in building rapport, and also the opener and the creating a conversation, is agreement for what the conversation is for. And I don't think a lot of people approach it that way. I know I didn't. The second part, of course, is learning and exploring and probing, with the goal not to manipulate somebody, but to gain a clear, complete, and mutual understanding of their needs. So you gain agreement about what the needs are. And then, of course, you can then address those needs, find a way to brainstorm with your client some of the solutions. That's where you really bring value, because you can pull from your own experience, others' experiences, the knowledge you have. I find the more I'm in financial services, the less I need financial services knowledge, and the more I need to know how to manage a conversation and how to bring other people's experiences. So if I was talking to 2018 Ivan, I would say, 2018 Ivan, focus on sharing what you've learned from other people and other clients and bring that to that client relationship. Not a cookie cutter approach, but to give them a sense of what it's like for other people and different people. Like sometimes bringing, look, here's what it was for this person. Here's what it was for that person. Then the fourth step is resolving and gaining agreement for action. So I'm feeling kind of proud that I put that in the preface, because that really did tie it all together. But I do see what's missing, Kumar, when I wrote Success in Your Career Depends Upon Your Ability to Gain Agreement for Action. It was a very positive message. I said, if you improve your ability to retain and grow relationships through powerful conversations, you'll become more valuable to your company, you'll make more money, and you increase your job satisfaction. There's no skill more important than the ability to be effective in conversation. I stand behind that phrase. But what isn't there is failure in your career is a result of you not improving your ability to gain agreement for action, right? Like you are undermining yourself because you are not developing fundamental skill or even being conscious of your incompetence. So that's why I'm excited. Another reason why I'm excited is because this second book is going to be, it's not in place of, it's to build on top of and give people a swift kick to say, hey, pay attention here. All right, I'm sensing that in this conversation, we can bring it to a close. Would you care to make a closing statement?
Yeah, I think that if there's one takeaway anyone listening to this episode should have, it's that, no matter how successful you are, or, even if you're a beginner and you're just starting out, there's always a lot of work to be done. And it's a long ongoing process. The big lesson and something that will be in your book that I've, come to the sort of epiphany of lately is don't overwork yourself. Find a good balance to where you can continue to get better and better day by day, even if it's just a little bit, or even if it's week by week, you're getting a little bit better. Don't expect to go from zero to hero all at once. Everybody I've ever met, yourself included, who's very good at managing relationships, has admitted after the fact that it was a multi-decade process. Although in the heat of the moment at 25 years old, Ivan thought he was great at this. 25 years later, maybe not so much at that point in time. And so I think that understanding is something that's very helpful to come to terms with, knowing that it's a process. You have to focus on the little things. Don't get too invested in it, and then let time do the work for you and get a little bit better, little by little, and then you'll be great someday.
I actually still leave every conversation regretting something I did or didn't do or say, and thinking about how I can get better. And so I think I also put that in the preface, is that over the years, I've managed thousands of relationships and won billions in new business. I'm humbled by my success and also proud of it, but I still feel driven every day and work to improve. I know I can still get a lot better. I know that the 2021 version of me feels that way, and the 2031 version of me is going to feel that way. I'm going to close with a concept from a book that is one of the ones that has really influenced me, called Atomic Habits by James Clear. And he says, habits are the compound interest of self-improvement. If you get 1% better every day, you will be 37.78 times better in a year. On the flip side, if you get 1% worse every day, he goes 0.99 to the 365th power is 0.03. The effects of small habits compound over time. For example, if you can get just 1% better every day, you'll end up with results that are nearly 37 times better after 1 year. With that, Kumar, I do not want to wait another 3 years to have you back on Conversations About Conversations. I want to thank you sincerely, with gratitude, for being a part of this conversation about conversations.
You're very welcome, Ivan. And thank you so much for having me on.